Captain Alex Morrison stood in the center of the massive chamber and watched the final votes appear on the crystal displays above his head. The numbers glowed red against the dark walls. Humanity had been rejected again. This made 7 times. In 3 years that the Galactic Council had said no to human membership, the chamber was huge and filled with beings from across the galaxy. Some looked like giant insects with clicking mandibles. Others were made of living crystal that sang when they moved. A few appeared to be clouds of gas that somehow held their shape. All of them had just voted against letting humans join their club. Alex kept his face calm even though his heart was beating fast. Next to him stood Dr. Lisa Grant, who studied alien life forms. She was writing notes in her small book like always. Her pen moved steady across the page, but Alex could see her jaw was tight with anger. Council Speaker Vexthara rose from her seat high above the chamber floor. She was tall and thin with 4 arms and skin that shifted colors. Her voice echoed through the space when she spoke. "The humans are too young," she said. "They fight too much. They ask too many questions. They do not think like the rest of us." One by one, the different species gave their reasons for voting no. The ethereal collective said humans were too emotional and could not be trusted to make good decisions. The Hive Mind Coalition complained that humans thought for themselves instead of working together like proper beings should. The Ancient Korthak spoke about human technology being too simple and their understanding of the universe being too basic. Alex listened to each complaint without changing his expression. He had heard these same words many times before. The aliens thought humans were dangerous because they did not follow rules without asking why. They thought humans were primitive because their ships were smaller and their weapons were different. They thought humans were unworthy because they had only been traveling in space for a few 100 years. Dr. Grant stopped writing and looked up at the speakers. Her green eyes were hard as stone. She had spent years learning alien languages and customs. She had written papers about every species in the council. She had taught their children and healed their sick. None of that seemed to matter now. The vote was final. 412 species had voted against human membership. Only 37 had voted in favor. The rest had not voted at all, which counted as a no according to council rules. Alex stood up slowly and walked to the speaking platform in the center of the chamber. His boots made soft sounds on the smooth floor. Every eye and sensor and awareness turned toward him. The chamber became completely quiet. He spoke in a clear voice that carried to every corner of the vast space. He thanked the council for their time and consideration. He said humanity understood their position and would respect their decision. He wished them well in their future meetings and decisions. His words were polite and formal with no anger or bitterness in them. The aliens seemed surprised by his calm response. Many had expected shouting or threats or demands for another vote. Instead, Alex simply bowed his head slightly and turned to leave. Dr. Grant closed her notebook and stood up. She gathered the data tablets and information packets that humanity had brought to support their application. Every piece of human technology and every research paper went into the carrying cases. Nothing was left behind. The other members of the human delegation followed their captain toward the exit. There were 12 humans in total, including scientists and diplomats and cultural experts. They walked in perfect silence with their heads held high. Their footsteps echoed in the quiet chamber. Some of the aliens whispered among themselves as the humans left. A few seemed uncomfortable with how polite and dignified the rejection had been received. Most looked satisfied that another upstart species had been put in their place. Alex reached the massive doors that led out of the chamber. He paused for just a moment and looked back at the assembled council. His expression was unreadable. Then he stepped through the doorway and was gone. Dr. Grant was the last human to leave. She stopped at the threshold and turned around one final time. Her eyes swept across the hundreds of alien faces staring back at her. She had once believed these beings could become friends and partners. Now she knew better. The doors closed behind the human delegation with a soft sound. In the chamber, the aliens began talking again about trade routes and territory disputes and other business. The vote was over and humanity was forgotten. They returned to their normal affairs as if nothing important had happened. Outside in the corridor, Alex Morrison walked toward the docking bay where their ship waited. His team followed behind him in continued silence. They had asked for so little and been given even less. But they would not beg or plead or make a scene. They had their answer and their dignity. That would have to be enough. The human delegation boarded their ship and left council space that same day. They filed no complaints and made no angry statements. They simply disappeared into the vast darkness between the stars, carrying with them a quiet determination that the galaxy would soon come to understand. 6 months had passed since the Council rejected humanity for the 7th time. The first sign that something was different came when a Vorthan trade ship arrived at the Proxima Research Station, expecting to pick up their monthly supply of rare minerals. The station was dark and empty. Captain Zektar of the Vorthan vessel sent repeated messages to the station but received no response. When his crew boarded the facility, they found it completely cleaned out. Every piece of equipment was gone. Every computer had been wiped clean. Even the furniture had been removed. The only thing left was a simple note, thanked them for their business, and wished them well. Dr. Lisa Grant had run the Proxima station for 8 years. Her research on quantum crystallization had helped 3 different species improve their energy systems. She had trained dozens of alien scientists and shared her knowledge freely with anyone who asked. Now she was gone without explanation. The Vorthan captain sent a report to his superiors, but they were not too worried. Humans came and went all the time. Someone else would probably take over the station soon. They had more important things to think about. Similar reports began coming in from across council space. The human agricultural colony on Harmony 3 stopped all food shipments to nearby worlds. The farming families packed up their equipment and livestock and disappeared overnight. The fields they left behind were clean and empty, with no trace of the advanced growing systems they had developed. Commander Jake Phillips supervised the evacuation of New Geneva, which was humanity's largest settlement in council territory. The operation was planned down to the smallest detail. Every human family knew exactly when and where to go. They took everything with them, including the bodies of their dead from the orbital cemetery. The withdrawal was so complete that it seemed like humans had never lived there at all. The buildings they left behind were structurally sound but contained nothing useful. Every computer system had been wiped. Every piece of advanced technology had been removed. Even the power generators had been taken apart and carried away. Local alien governments tried to contact human representatives but found that all the embassy buildings had been quietly closed. The staff had simply packed up and left with forwarding addresses that led to empty offices and distant systems. There were no angry messages or political statements. The humans just vanished. Elder Zephan of the Crystalline Assembly became concerned when the human trade hub at the crossroads went silent. The facility was a vital connection point for 17 different star systems. Thousands of ships passed through it every day, carrying goods and passengers across a huge section of the galaxy. When Zephan's investigators arrived, they found the massive station completely abandoned. The docking bays were empty. The control centers were dark. A simple sign on the main entrance said the facility had been relocated but gave no new location. The forwarding address led to a small office that had been closed for months. Minister Kate Sullivan had managed human trade relations for over a decade. She knew the shipping routes and cargo schedules better than anyone. Her sudden disappearance left a gap that no one else could fill. Trade ships began arriving at empty stations with no one to guide them to their destinations. The council began to notice that human ships were no longer visible in the major space lanes. The small freighters and passenger vessels that had once been common sights simply stopped appearing. When officials tried to track them down, they found that all human vessel registrations had been properly canceled, and all fees had been paid in full. Dr. Nina Ross had been the leading expert on quantum communication systems. Her research stations throughout the galaxy went dark one by one as her teams packed up and left. the quantum relay network that connected distant worlds, began showing signs of strain without her constant maintenance and updates. The aliens who had worked with human teams found themselves suddenly alone. Projects that had been moving forward smoothly came to a halt when the human experts simply did not show up for work one day. Their alien colleagues received polite messages explaining that the humans had accepted new positions elsewhere. Captain Ryan Burke had led peacekeeping missions in the troubled border regions between hostile species. His unconventional methods had prevented 3 wars in the past 2 years. When he disappeared along with his entire unit, the fragile ceasefires began to break down almost immediately. Some council members began asking questions about where all the humans had gone. Official inquiries were sent to Earth, but the responses were always the same. Humanity was pursuing other opportunities and wished the council well in their future endeavors. The messages were polite but gave no useful information. Attempts to locate human settlements outside council space proved unsuccessful. It seemed like humanity had simply vanished from the galaxy entirely. Their ships were gone. Their colonies were empty. Their people had disappeared without a trace. The withdrawal was so quiet and orderly that many aliens did not notice it was happening until it was already complete. There were no dramatic confrontations or angry departures. The humans simply finished their current obligations and then left for destinations unknown. Few species tried to convince their human contacts to stay, but found that the decisions had already been made. Every human in council space had received new assignments that would take them far away. They were sorry to leave, but they had no choice in the matter. The efficiency of the evacuation was impressive and slightly disturbing. It suggested that humanity had been planning this withdrawal for a long time. They had known exactly what to do and when to do it. The rejection by the council had simply been the signal to begin an operation that was already prepared. As the months passed and more human facilities went dark, the council began to realize that something significant was happening. The quiet species that had asked only for acceptance and been denied it 7 times was making a statement without saying a word. They were leaving and they were taking everything with them. 1 year after the rejection, the Galactic Council began to understand what they had lost. The first major crisis came when the Vorthan Empire discovered that their most productive mining operations had completely stopped working. The massive drilling platforms that extracted rare metals from asteroid fields had broken down and could not be repaired. Engineer Tom Bradley had designed the drilling systems using human technology that was far more advanced than anything the Vorthans possessed. The machines were efficient and reliable, but also incredibly complex. When critical components began failing, the Vorthan technicians realized they had no idea how to fix them. The instruction manuals were written in human languages that few aliens could read properly. The replacement parts were manufactured in human factories that no longer existed. The Vorthans had been completely dependent on human expertise without ever realizing it. Similar problems appeared across the galaxy as systems that had been quietly maintained by human experts began to fail. The quantum communication network that connected distant worlds started experiencing regular breakdowns. Dr. Nina Ross had been the only person who truly understood how the quantum entanglers worked, and she was gone. Council species had used the quantum network for centuries, but they had never learned the underlying principles. They knew which buttons to push and which settings to use, but they did not understand why the system worked. When the delicate quantum fields began to destabilize, there was no one left who could fix them. Captain Ryan Burke had been mediating a territorial dispute between the Sectari Federation and the Molten Republics. His patient diplomacy had kept the 2 species from open warfare for over 3 years. Without his steady influence, the old hatreds quickly surfaced again. The council sent their own peacekeepers to maintain order, but the results were disastrous. The alien mediators followed strict protocols that treated every situation the same way. They did not understand that each conflict was unique and required different approaches. Within weeks of Burke's departure, the border regions erupted into violence on the agricultural world of harmony. The carefully balanced ecosystem that fed billions of beings across multiple star systems began to collapse. Professor Amy Chun had spent decades working with local farmers to develop sustainable, growing methods that worked with the planet's natural cycles. The alien farmers remembered the techniques that Chin had taught them, but they did not understand the science behind the methods. When weather patterns changed and crop diseases appeared, they did not know how to adapt. The yields dropped dramatically and food shortages began appearing throughout the sector. The ethereal collective tried to contact Earth directly, hoping to bypass the Council and negotiate with humanity on their own terms. They sent their most skilled diplomats carrying offers of trade agreements and cultural exchanges. The response they received was polite but final. Humanity was pursuing other opportunities, the message said. They wished the ethereal collective well in their future endeavors, but they were not interested in new partnerships at this time. The diplomats were welcome to submit their proposals through official channels, but no meetings would be arranged. Council Speaker Vexthara called an emergency session to discuss what she termed the human problem. For the first time in decades, the council chambers were filled with worried representatives instead of confident leaders. The casual dismissal of humanity was being replaced by growing concern. The crystalline assembly reported that their manufacturing centers were operating at only 60% capacity because they could no longer obtain the specialized components that human factories had been providing. The components were not complex by human standards, but they required precision that other species could not match. The ancient Korthic admitted that their historical archives were becoming corrupted because they no longer had access to the data storage systems that Dr. Grant's team had developed. The quantum storage matrices were failing and no one knew how to repair them. Thousands of years of accumulated knowledge were being lost. Dr. Mike Johnson had been working with the HiveMind Coalition to develop new forms of collective consciousness that would allow individual creativity within group thinking. His research had been making remarkable progress until he suddenly vanished along with all his data and equipment. The coalition discovered that their experiments had been completely dependent on Johnson's theoretical framework. Without his guidance, they could not continue the work. Worse yet, they realized that the small amount of individual thinking they had developed was now their most valuable asset for solving new problems. Minister Paul Davis had been teaching alien children in the prestigious Council Academy on Central Station. His classes on creative problem-solving and independent thinking had been controversial but popular. When he left, his alien students were the only ones who could find innovative solutions to the growing crisis. The traditional alien education systems focused on memorizing established facts and following proven procedures. Davis had taught his students to question assumptions and think for themselves. Now these troublemakers were the only ones capable of adapting to rapidly changing circumstances. Engineer Lucy Thompson's infrastructure designs had been quietly adopted throughout council space. Her improvements to power distribution and waste management systems were so subtle that most aliens never realized they existed. When the systems began failing, the aliens discovered that their cities and stations had been dependent on human innovations. Water treatment plants that had run perfectly for years began producing contaminated water. Power grids that had been completely reliable started experiencing cascading failures. Transportation networks that had moved billions of passengers safely suddenly became dangerous and unreliable. The council sent search teams to human space, hoping to locate the missing population and convince them to return. The teams found empty star systems and abandoned colonies. The humans had left behind functional facilities, but they had taken all the knowledge needed to operate them properly. Some installations contained automated systems that were still running, but the aliens could not access the control programs. The computers recognized only human biometric signatures and voice patterns. Even when the aliens tried to physically override the systems, they found that the machines had been designed to shut down permanently if tampered with. The search teams reported back that humanity appeared to have vanished completely from known space. There were signs of massive construction projects in distant systems, but no indication of where the human population had actually gone. It was as if an entire species had simply decided to disappear. As infrastructure continued failing and conflicts spread throughout Council territory, the aliens began to realize that they had made a terrible mistake. The quiet species they had rejected had been holding their civilization together in ways they never imagined. Now that support was gone, and the galaxy was falling apart around them. 2 years had passed since humanity's quiet departure, and the Galactic Council faced its worst crisis in 3,000 years. A deadly plague swept through the Outer Rim, affecting 17 different species simultaneously. The disease crossed biological barriers that should have been impossible to breach and spread faster than anyone had ever seen. Dr. Lisa Grant had been the galaxy's leading expert on interspecies disease transmission. Her research centers had developed treatment protocols for dozens of potential pandemic scenarios. She had trained medical teams across Council space and created early warning systems that could detect dangerous mutations before they spread. Now her laboratories were empty and her research was gone. The alien medical teams she had trained tried to apply her methods, but they did not understand the underlying principles. They could follow the procedures she had written, but they could not adapt them to fight a new disease that behaved unlike anything they had seen before. The plague spread from world to world, carried by trade ships and passenger vessels. Quarantine procedures that had worked for centuries proved useless against a pathogen that seemed to change its behavior as it moved between different species. Billions of beings became sick and millions died, while Council medical authorities struggled to respond. At the same time, a new threat emerged from the dark space between galaxies. The Void Swarm was a species of spaceborne predators that attacked using tactics no one had encountered before. Their ships moved in patterns that seemed random but were actually incredibly sophisticated. They struck without warning and vanished before defensive forces could respond. General Sam Torres had trained the Council's elite military units in adaptive combat strategies. His methods emphasized flexibility and creative thinking over rigid adherence to established doctrine. He taught officers to analyze enemy behavior and develop new tactics in real time during battle. The Council's military leaders tried to fight the Void Swarm using traditional approaches. They deployed massive fleets with overwhelming firepower, expecting to crush the invaders through superior technology and numbers. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that learned from every encounter and adapted faster than they could respond. The Void Swarm studied Council tactics during each battle and modified their own strategies accordingly. Within months, they had developed countermeasures for every standard Council weapon and defense system. The alien military commanders had never faced an opponent that could evolve its methods so quickly. The quantum communication network that connected the galaxy finally collapsed completely. Without Dr. Nina Ross and her team to maintain the delicate quantum fields, the system destabilized beyond repair. Council species found themselves isolated on their homeworlds, unable to coordinate responses to the multiple crises they faced. Trade networks that had operated smoothly for millennia broke down when merchants could no longer communicate with their contacts in distant systems. Diplomatic relations became impossible when ambassadors could not send messages home. The unity that had defined the Council for thousands of years began to fragment as each species focused on its own survival. Minister Paul Davis had introduced concepts of individual creativity and independent thinking to Council species through his educational programs. His students were now scattered across the galaxy, but they had learned to question established methods and develop innovative solutions to new problems. These former troublemakers became the only beings capable of finding answers to the crises facing their species. They developed new medical treatments by combining knowledge from different fields. They created novel military tactics by thinking outside traditional parameters. They found ways to maintain communication using older technologies that did not depend on quantum networks, but there were too few of them and they were spread too thin across hundreds of worlds. The alien governments that had once dismissed them as disruptive influences now desperately needed their help but could not find them. Many had been forced into exile or obscurity because their unconventional ideas had been seen as dangerous. Engineer Lucy Thompson's infrastructure designs began failing throughout Council space as critical components wore out and could not be replaced. Her improvements to city systems had been so subtle that most aliens never realized they existed until they stopped working. Water treatment facilities that had provided clean drinking water for centuries began producing contaminated supplies. Power generation plants that had run efficiently for decades started experiencing cascading failures that spread through entire planetary grids. Transportation systems that had moved billions of passengers safely suddenly became death traps. The Council sent envoys to the edge of known space hoping to locate humanity and negotiate their return. The search teams discovered evidence of massive construction projects in dead star systems, but found no trace of human populations. Whatever humanity was building, it was beyond anything the Council had ever seen. Captain Ben Rogers led the largest search expedition in Council history. His fleet of 200 ships carried representatives from every member species and had authority to offer humanity anything they wanted in exchange for their help. When they reached the coordinates of the nearest human construction site, they found something that defied understanding, a structure that spanned an entire star system stretched across the void between planets. It appeared to be some kind of gateway or portal built from materials that registered on no known sensors. The construction showed clear signs of human engineering, but was far beyond anything humanity had ever revealed to the Council. Rogers tried to establish communication with the structure but received no response. When his ships approached too closely, they were gently but firmly pushed away by forces that his science teams could not identify. It became clear that humanity had been hiding their true technological capabilities for decades or perhaps centuries. The search fleet returned to Council space with reports that shocked the remaining leadership. Humanity had not been the primitive species they had pretended to be. Every innovation they had shared with the Council had been a simplified version of far more advanced technology. Dr. Marcus Hill was a Council xenopsychologist who had spent years studying human behavior patterns. His analysis of the search reports revealed the disturbing truth about humanity's relationship with the Council. The humans had been treating the Council species like children, offering them toys while keeping the real tools locked away. Every human scientist who had worked with Council species had been carefully selected and trained to reveal only what their alien colleagues could understand and safely use. The true scope of human knowledge and capability had been hidden behind a facade of helpful cooperation and eager friendship. As the galactic civilization continued to collapse around them, the Council finally understood what they had rejected. Humanity had offered genuine partnership and had been willing to share their knowledge freely. In return, they had asked only for acceptance and recognition as equals. Instead, they had been dismissed as primitive and dangerous. The Council had chosen to maintain their illusion of superiority rather than accept that a young species might have something valuable to offer. Now, they were paying the price for their arrogance and prejudice. The galaxy was dying and humanity was gone forever. 5 years had passed since the Council rejected humanity and the galaxy was in chaos. 3 member species had completely withdrawn from the Council, unable to cope with the cascading failures that continued to spread through their territories. Wars raged in 4 different sectors as old conflicts reignited, without human peacekeepers to maintain stability. The Sectari Federation and the Molten Republics had resumed their ancient territorial dispute with a violence that shocked even their own populations. Without Captain Ryan Burke's patient mediation, the 2 species had forgotten how to resolve differences through negotiation. Their fleets clashed in brutal battles that left entire star systems devastated. Council Speaker Vex Thara had aged decades in the past 5 years. Her once proud species now huddled in failing cities on dying worlds. The Arthropod Collective had been one of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, but they could no longer maintain their own technology without human support. Vex Thara authorized the largest search operation in galactic history. Every remaining Council species contributed ships and personnel to find humanity and bring them back. Pride was no longer relevant when survival itself was at stake. The search fleet spread out across hundreds of star systems, following any trace of human activity they could find. Captain Ben Rogers commanded the primary search fleet, which included the most advanced ships and sensors the Council could still operate. His team followed quantum signatures and energy readings that suggested massive human construction projects in previously unexplored regions of space. The first discovery came at the edge of the Sagittarius Arm, where Rogers found a star system that had been completely transformed. 3 dead planets had been converted into massive industrial complexes that stretched from their surfaces to their orbital zones. The scale of construction was beyond anything the Council had ever attempted. The installations were clearly human, but they used technology that seemed centuries ahead of anything humanity had shown the Council. Fusion reactors the size of moons powered manufacturing facilities that could build ships or habitats in a matter of days. The entire system hummed with activity, but there were no human beings to be found. Dr. Sarah Wells led the scientific analysis team that tried to understand what they were seeing. Her instruments detected materials that did not appear in any Council database and energy patterns that violated several supposedly fundamental laws of physics. The humans had not just hidden their true capabilities, they had hidden an entirely different understanding of the universe. Similar discoveries followed as the search fleets explored system after system. They found massive space habitats that could house billions of people. They discovered research stations that were conducting experiments in fields the Council had never imagined. They located defensive installations that could protect entire sectors from any conceivable threat, but they found no humans anywhere. The installations were automated and responded only to human genetic signatures and voice commands. When alien teams tried to board the facilities, they were politely but firmly turned away by security systems that could not be overridden or bypassed. Commander Jake Phillips had been one of the last humans to leave Council space. His former colleagues remembered him as a competent but unremarkable officer who managed evacuation procedures. Now they realized he had been overseeing the most complex logistical operation in galactic history while making it look routine. The search teams discovered that every human in Council space had been carefully selected and positioned for the eventual withdrawal. Scientists had been placed in critical research facilities. Engineers had been assigned to essential infrastructure projects. Diplomats had been stationed where they could monitor alien reactions and gather intelligence. The evacuation had not been a panicked flight from rejection. It had been the final phase of a long-term strategy that had been planned and prepared for decades. Every human had known their role and their destination. They had simply been waiting for the signal to begin. Dr. Marcus Hill analyzed the pattern of human placement throughout Council space and reached a disturbing conclusion. Humanity had been studying the Council species like laboratory specimens. They had identified every weakness and dependency in alien civilization and had positioned themselves to become indispensable. The withdrawal had revealed the shocking truth about the relationship between humans and aliens. The Council had believed they were the advanced civilization graciously allowing a primitive species to participate in galactic affairs. In reality, humanity had been the teachers working with students, who did not realize they were being educated. Engineer Linda Parker had designed the quantum communication network that connected the galaxy. Her work had been presented as an improvement to existing alien technology, but the search teams discovered that the entire system had been built from scratch using purely human innovations. The aliens had contributed nothing but raw materials and labor. Similar revelations followed as the investigation continued. Every major advancement in Council technology during the past century had originated from human research. The aliens had been taking credit for innovations they did not understand and could not have developed on their own. The most shocking discovery came when Rogers' team located what appeared to be humanity's primary construction facility. The massive complex orbited a young star at the edge of known space and was clearly the source of all the technology they had been finding. Ships the size of small moons moved between construction bays while automated systems built structures that defied comprehension. At the center of the complex was a gateway unlike anything in Council experience. The portal stretched across space for thousands of kilometers and pulsed with energies that made nearby stars seem dim by comparison. It was clearly a transportation device, but its destination was completely unknown. Captain Rogers attempted to establish communication with the facility but received only an automated response. The message was brief and final. Humanity had moved beyond the local galaxy and was pursuing opportunities in distant regions of the universe. They wished the Council species well but would not be returning. The search fleets returned to Council space with evidence that humanity had been far more advanced than anyone had ever imagined. They had possessed the technology to solve every crisis the galaxy now faced, but they had chosen to leave rather than help species that had rejected them. Dr. Hill's final report contained the most devastating conclusion of all. Humanity had offered the Council genuine partnership and friendship. They had been willing to share their knowledge and work together toward a better future for all species. The rejection had not surprised them because they had predicted it with mathematical precision. The humans had known exactly how the Council would respond to their application for membership. They had prepared for rejection while hoping for acceptance. When the inevitable vote came, they had simply activated plans that had been ready for years. As the search teams delivered their reports, the remaining Council leadership finally understood the magnitude of their mistake. They had rejected not just another species, but the one civilization capable of lifting them to new heights of achievement and understanding. Humanity was gone, and they were never coming back. The galaxy would have to face its growing darkness alone. 10 years had passed since the Galactic Council rejected humanity for the 7th and final time. The once mighty civilization that had ruled the galaxy for 3 millennia now existed only in fragments. Half of the member species had either withdrawn from the Council or collapsed entirely under the weight of problems they could not solve. Keeper Thizes was a young intern from the Crystalline Assembly who had been assigned to catalog the abandoned facilities in Council space. Most buildings had been stripped clean when their occupants fled or died, but Thizes hoped to find something useful in the forgotten corners of the galaxy's former capital. The human embassy on Central Station had been empty for a decade. Thizes had passed it many times during her duties but had never bothered to investigate. Today she noticed that one of the service entrances had been left unlocked. Curiosity overcame caution, and she slipped inside to explore. The building was dark and cold, with dust covering everything. Most of the rooms were completely empty, but Thizes found a hidden door behind what had once been the ambassador's office. The door led to a small archive room that had somehow been overlooked during the evacuation. Inside were detailed records of every interaction between humanity and the Council dating back over 2 centuries. The files contained diplomatic communications, scientific reports, and personal messages that painted a complete picture of the relationship between the 2 civilizations. Thizes spent days reading through the archive, and what she discovered changed everything she thought she knew about humanity's departure. The record showed that humans had predicted their rejection with precise mathematical accuracy. They had known the Council would say no and had been planning their withdrawal for decades. Every human in Council space had been carefully selected and trained for their eventual role in the evacuation. Scientists like Dr. Lisa Grant had been positioned at critical research facilities not just to do good work, but to gather intelligence about alien capabilities and weaknesses. Engineers like Lucy Thompson had been assigned to infrastructure projects to make alien civilization dependent on human expertise. The peaceful departure had not been an act of gracious acceptance, but the final phase of a complex strategy that had taken generations to implement. Humanity had offered genuine friendship while simultaneously preparing for the rejection they knew would come. Captain Alex Morrison had left a personal message in the archive that explained the human perspective. He spoke directly to whoever might find the recording, and his words were calm and measured despite the pain visible in his eyes. Humanity bore no ill will toward the Council or its member species, he said. The rejection had been expected and even respected. Every species had the right to choose its own path, just as humanity had the right to choose theirs. They had offered partnership and been told they were unworthy. They accepted that judgment, and wished the council well in their future endeavors. The recording ended with coordinates that led to a small dead world on the galactic rim. Theises convinced her supervisors to send a ship to investigate, and what they found there broke the hearts of every council member who learned about it. On the barren surface of the forgotten planet stood a simple monument carved from black stone. It bore the names of every human who had died while serving council interests, including scientists who had given their lives fighting alien diseases and peacekeepers who had died preventing wars between hostile species. At the base of the monument was a single inscription that captured the tragedy of what had been lost. It read simply, "They believed in a better galaxy." Dr. Nina Ross had died trying to save a Vorthan research station from a quantum cascade failure. Engineer Tom Bradley had been killed when a mining platform exploded while he was installing safety improvements. Minister Paul Davis had sacrificed himself to rescue alien children from a terrorist attack on the Council Academy. Dozens of humans had given their lives in service to species that considered them primitive and unworthy. They had believed that cooperation and friendship could overcome prejudice and fear. They had been wrong, but they had never stopped trying until the very end. Theises brought copies of the archive back to the few remaining council leaders. The revelations caused the final collapse of any pretense that the council could survive without fundamental change. The organization that had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years officially dissolved within months of the discovery. The surviving species scattered to their homeworlds or wherever they could find refuge. Some tried to maintain their old ways, but most had learned the hard lesson that isolation meant death in a galaxy that had become more dangerous than anyone remembered. Few species attempted to follow humanity's trail through the gateway at the edge of known space, but their ships vanished without trace. Whatever lay beyond that portal was not meant for alien civilizations that still thought in terms of conquest and domination rather than cooperation and growth. As the years passed, the galaxy became quieter and darker. The quantum communication networks remained broken. The trade routes stayed empty. The research stations continued to fail one by one until entire sectors went dark and lifeless. In the growing silence between the stars, the few remaining council species finally understood what they had rejected. Humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology or their innovation. It had been their ability to see potential in others and their willingness to lift up those around them. The humans had offered to share not just their knowledge, but their vision of what the galaxy could become. They had believed that different species could work together despite their differences. They had imagined a future where cooperation replaced competition and understanding overcame fear. The Council had chosen to maintain their illusion of superiority, rather than accept that a young species might have wisdom to offer. They had valued their pride more than their future. Now they faced the consequences of that choice in the form of a dying galaxy that grew colder and lonelier with each passing year, sometimes at night. When the stars seemed especially distant, the survivors would detect faint signals from the direction of humanity's exodus. The transmissions were not calls for help or offers to return, but simple messages of farewell broadcast on frequencies the Council had thought long abandoned. The signals carried music and poetry and stories from a species that had found new frontiers beyond the reach of those who had rejected them. They spoke of wonders discovered and friends made among civilizations that understood the value of cooperation over conquest. Humanity had moved on to other things and other places with other possibilities. They had found partners who appreciated their gifts and welcomed their friendship. The galaxy they left behind could only listen to the echoes of what they had lost and wonder what might have been if fear had not overcome hope. In the end, the Council learned that the greatest tragedy was not the collapse of their civilization, but the realization that it could have been prevented. They had been offered salvation and had chosen destruction. They had been given love and had returned hatred. They had been shown the future and had clung to the past. Now they faced eternity alone in the darkness. They had chosen for themselves while humanity sang among distant stars they would never see.